Hello, I'm Sarah Barth, Executive Director at Sempervirens Fund. Thank you for joining us in another of our Under the Redwoods webinar series in which we explore all things redwoods, ranging from their history, science, inspiration, and benefits. So we appreciate you joining us, and thank you especially to Sharp Investments, who's hosted this webinar series. We're grateful for their support. Sure. We are joined today by Dr. Earyn McGee. She's a science communicator, a herpetologist who studies reptiles and amphibians, a researcher, and currently she is the coordinator of conservation engagement at the Los Angeles Zoo. She also, just in her free time, has been doing a lot to encourage um, women, girls, people of color to engage in herpetology. And so I know she's going to talk about that as well. You can find her on Instagram at hashtag Afro_herper, HERPER, and online at EarynMcGee.com. So help us hashtag find that lizard, Dr. McGee. Welcome.
Thanks so much for that introduction, and I am so happy to be here today. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and I'm gonna actually be taking you guys to the desert a little bit today. Um, but before I get too into everything, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about hashtag Find That Lizard. So if you don't know, it's a game that I created on social media because as a grad student, when I in 2018, I didn't know how I could share my joy of being in nature and the environment with a lot of people. And so I was like, well, the way that I can do this and still like graduate and not have a whole lot of, financial responsibility is I can post on social media. So I went out and I started taking these pictures of lizards camouflaged in their natural environments. And then I would post them on Twitter primarily and then Instagram. Now I'm doing it on my website because Twitter has become X and Instagram changes like the photo quality based off of how much engagement you get on your post. And on my website, I can control for, whether a social media site is imploding or if they don't value my content as much. And so the photo qualities is just better. And I can tell people more information about the lizards and stuff like that. And so I really started Find That Lizard because I was out in the field one day and I was in a site where I wasn't seeing a lot of lizards and I needed every data point I could get, which included recapturing this one lizard. And I would essentially, I saw her, she saw me. Lizards are incredibly smart. Once they're caught once, it's a lot harder to catch them again. And so she took off running, and then I took off running after her. And then eventually I was about to give up, but then I started to scan the area one more time and I looked over my shoulder and there she was on a tree and I was able to break up her camouflage because she had a bright orange 5 on her back from when she was previously captured. And so this first photo was awful. It was terrible and I was just really truly surprised that people like went along with it. And really it wasn't even that many people. It only had like a couple of like likes and maybe one comment, and then in my own hubris I was like, huh, I could turn this into something, and I did, which was really cool. So we're gonna go ahead and start off with a hashtag Find That Lizard challenge just so you guys can get the sense of the game. And so just to make it a little bit easier for you, I marked a couple of places where there could be lizards. And in this photo, we're looking for a Western fence lizard. And so I can't really see what your comments are, but I'm still going to give you guys like a couple of seconds to make some guesses of where you think the lizard might be. All right. I'm going to give you like 2 more seconds and then we're going to move on to the reveal. So if you're one of the people who guessed C, You are correct. That is the lizard. And so that's essentially the game. I post the photo, I give information about the lizard, and then I post the reveal. And so one of like the coolest things about this is just that being able to like build community with people and then have people actually like take it offline and apply it into their real life. Like I had a teacher who put it into like her um the start of her day for her students and stuff like that. And then in the upper left-hand corner, when I used to have a lot more time as a grad student, I would make gifts of like the reveal. And so like this one kid's mom came up to me at a conference and they were just like, yeah, my daughter made this for you. And it's probably like one of the like my most favorite like things that I've ever gotten from someone. And so that was really cool. And it's really nice to see how it's impacting people's lives and getting people to uh, take more time in nature, and even if they're just taking like a walk or something like that, like actually making observations about like the nature around us. I think that a lot of times especially because when we live like in the city or like we're just like really busy with work, it's hard to overlook how nature is always around us. And so that is what I'm really grateful that this game has done, is it's really gotten people to pay that extra little bit of attention. So why lizards? We'll get into that, but taking you back now, we started in grad school. Now we're going back to when Erin was a little kid. I was always interested in nature. My dad, when I was a kid, bought me this book. It was called The Big Book of Why, because I was always asking questions about things. I wanted to know how, rabbits were able to survive in the snow. I wanted to know why birds could fly in the rain. Just a bunch of different questions that ended up being natural history questions that I had. And at the time, I had no idea that these were natural history questions. I'm lucky enough that my parents were super supportive. And so they sent me, like, I was born in Atlanta and lived there for a while. So they sent me to Zoo Atlanta summer camp. And so essentially, they were just like, hey, you're weird because you want to be outside like this, but if this is your thing, that's fine. You just got to go to school and make it happen. And you could either be a vet or a zookeeper, because those are the things that they knew of. And they were like, well, we don't think zookeepers make enough money, so you can be a vet. And I went with that for a really long time, until I got to Howard University, where I met my undergraduate mentor, George Middendorf. And so you can see him with me in this picture here. And he is a herpetologist. And that's when I started to actually like learn about ecology and conservation, because honestly, I knew being a vet wasn't for me. Math is not like my strongest suit. And I did not want to be responsible for giving people's animals medicine and, potentially messing up the calculations or something like that. So I was like, let's try to figure out something else. And so this is one of like those moments where I started. I was talking to an upperclassman mentor about how I wanted to work with animals, and he was about to graduate. He was like, yeah, I was working in this guy's lab. He works with lizards. You want to work with animals? You should go work with him. And then from there, I got into the environmental biology scholars program at Howard, where I did my undergrad. And that program allowed me to do field research in the Chiricahua Mountains in southeastern Arizona on lizards for 2 years, as well as lab research when it was off season. And so then after college, I went to grad school at the University of Arizona, and funnily enough, my grad advisor, Michael Bogan, knew my undergraduate advisor, George Middendorf. And so when Michael was starting his lab at University of Arizona, he reached out to George and was like, hey, do you have any potential grad students for me? And George was like, I have just the person. And so Michael is actually an aquatic entomologist, so meaning that he studies insects primarily in stream systems and also fishes and things like that. And so he was just like, all right, well, we could work together, but we have to figure out how are we going to mix together lizards and aquatic inverts. And so we were able to do that. And really, I just want to say, for anybody who is thinking about going to grad school, or who knows anyone who's thinking about going to grad school, having an advisor who really has your back is so crucial. And I wouldn't have the kind of success that I do now without Michael, because he saw my, even when he didn't understand the vision, he trusted me enough that I had a vision and that he would support me through it. And so, my recommendation is, to look for a PI, look for an advisor, not necessarily a university or a program, because having someone who has your back is crucial. I had a great time in grad school and I actually kind of miss it. So a few things that we'll talk about during this presentation, and and all of this kind of like mashes together for me. But we'll talk about how my curiosity about nature goes into, my experiences as a Black woman in this predominantly white field, and then which fuels my desire to break down barriers, and then just generally wanting to have a positive impact on the world. But first, we're going to start with some of my lizard research. So my dissertation kind of had three very different parts to it, where the first was looking at lizards and how they could be potentially be impacted by drought and stream drying in the south western US. And then I also did a chapter looking at barriers preventing Black women from entering and remaining in natural resources careers. And then I worked with my sorority to create a program to introduce middle school aged Black girls in 2 cities in Arizona to careers in natural resources. I'm not going to get into too much of those second two chapters, and I'm going to focus on the lizards. And then I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that I'm doing at the zoo and other outreach stuff that I would just do on my own. So for the lizard study of my dissertation, I was really interested in how are these lizards going to be impacted by stream drying, and essentially are they eating emerging aquatic insects from stream systems. So aquatic insects are stuff like, we have mosquitoes, some flies, dragonflies, damselflies, and they lay their eggs in the water, and then they spend their larval stage in the water, and then when it's time to become adults, they crawl out, they emerge, and then they shed from that last larval stage into their adult form, and then they become part of the terrestrial system. And so I wanted to know, will lizard abundances be greater in perennial reaches? Will individuals within the species grow larger and faster along perennial streams as compared to ephemeral streams? And perennial streams are just streams that have water year round, where ephemeral ones are they dry out part of this part of the year, but then they all have water in other parts of the year. So we know a lot about how, different like detritus leaves and stuff that falls into the water impacts aquatic systems, but there is only recently being a lot of more studies looking at how aquatic subsidies really impact the terrestrial systems. And so from previous studies, we know that these aquatic insects, they emerge and they become food items for animals like spiders, birds, bats, and then of course, lizards. And so why lizards? Well, they play an important role in nutrient cycling as predators and prey. And so funnily enough, my undergrad advisor used to call baby lizards, especially yarrow spiny lizards, the lizards that I would study, ecological popcorn, because everything eats them. And it's a lot easier to study lizards and get permits to like handle them and actually get data from them than something that is like a larger mammal or a medium-sized mammal and things like that. So between just being playing that role in the ecosystem, as well as just being easier to study. That's why he picked lizards. And then because I started to learn a lot of really cool things about lizards, I just stuck with lizards because they are awesome. Also, I'm probably part lizard because like the lizards, they don't come out when it's inclement weather. I don't want to go outside when it's raining either. They like to bask in the sunlight. I like to bask in the sun. They don't get up too early. I don't wake up too early. So you see it just really started to work together for me there. So for grad school, I love southeastern Arizona so much that I went back and I was back in the Chiricahua Mountains. And so this is part of a Sky Island system. So before there was the desert in Arizona, these mountain ranges were connected because animals can go up and down the mountain and traverse across from mountain range to mountain range. But then we got the desert. And so then they got isolated. These mountain ranges got isolated because higher elevation species could not survive at these lower elevations, these hotter, drier conditions. And so we started to get some speciation. So that makes this whole area like really cool and biologically important. So I was looking at three species of lizards, Scalopus yerevi, yarrow spiny lizard, Scalopus virgatus, the striped plateau lizard, and then Urosaurus ornatus, the ornate tree lizard. And I had 100-meter stream reaches that were paired. So I had one that was perennial and one that was ephemeral. And so essentially the purpose of the ephemeral, like the reason we have paired was so that way I can simulate stream drying and what that might be like and just compare the lizard populations between the two areas. So for my methods, I did lizard capture. So I took measurements like mass, their sex, their length. So like from the snout to the vent and then the tail length, I looked to see if they had lost their tail or regrown tail and things like that. I looked at lizard abundances, insects. I also collected the insects because I used stable isotope analysis to see what the insects were, or see what the insects were eating, see what the lizards were eating. And so if you look at this bottom picture, we created these emergence traps, which were made of a PVC pipe, and they were put into a pyramid shape, and then it was draped with this mesh netting, so that way the insects couldn't get out. And then we put pool noodles, floaties on the bottom, so that way for the streams that were a little bit deeper, they wouldn't just sink. And then at the top of that pyramid was a bottle with a hole cut out, and then it had alcohol in it. And so when the insects would be ready to emerge, they would crawl up the side of the emergence trap to the top, and then the smell of the alcohol would make them fall into the bottle. And then I would just go and collect the bottle to see what kind of insects were in those areas. And so before I move on, I do want to talk a little bit about how I was capturing these lizards. So I was using a lasso. And so this is not a new technique. It's actually, probably one of the oldest herpetologist techniques in the book. And historically, it was called noosing. But for me, as a young Black woman in the middle of nowhere with no internet, Wi-Fi really, and to do that, it just really rubbed me the wrong way. But then also and for me, I just kind of, I was like, well, I guess this is just the way it is. I have to just deal with it until, years later, when I really started to understand how to like use my voice, I was able to say something. But then also when I would do community engagement events, if anyone does do that kind of thing, that once you like lose someone, it's really hard to get them back. And so the focus would be on, oh, you're noosing the lizards, that means that you're killing them. And then now I have to, instead of telling them like the information about the lizards and talking about conservation and ecology and stuff like that, now I'm calming down a kid and the parents, and like, no, we're not killing them, it doesn't hurt them. And so because of these reasons, where it's like, well, we say that we want to make this space more inclusive, well, then we need to have more inclusive language. But also when we go out and we do community engagement, we don't want to ever alienate our audiences. I used my platform on Twitter at the time to really start a conversation about this nomenclature. And so I was just kind of like, all right, well, how about we figure out something else? And so I didn't come up with lassoing, but it seemed to be something that a lot of people could get behind. And so I was like, all right, it doesn't have to be lassoing. We can pick anything, but we should really consider the kind of language that we use. And so here I didn't really see too much of a significant difference for lizard abundances between my perennial and ephemeral sites. However, I did see that for Sclopish yerevi, that they had higher mass and at perennial sites as compared to ephemeral ones, and that didn't hold for Sclopus virgatus. And then for their Urosaurus ornatus, the ornate tree lizard, we didn't include them in the analysis because the sample sizes were just too low. And then this is just like a general overview of all the stable isotope analysis that we did, looking to see what the lizards were eating. And we didn't see any real significant difference for any of these. And part of that we think has to just do with the fact that the Chiricahuas are so lush that the lizards don't necessarily need to have like a preference for maybe aquatic insects. And then also because they're sit and wait predators, it's just like whatever comes in front of their faces. And so maybe they're just not having the access to them. And so future research should look at, what is allowing Scalper yerevi as far as like the having that higher mass to do slightly better at perennial research than ephemeral ones. And then also what I'm really interested in doing that I would love to do is that my undergraduate advisor has like 40 years worth of toe clippings, which is what I use to do my stable isotope analysis. And I wonder what stable isotope analysis could tell us about what the lizards were eating and pairing that with the different like rainfall levels and stuff in that area over time, especially because when I talked to him, he's like, yeah, we can see that the population is declining for whatever reason, not sure why, but you can look at the data over this time period. And so I'm curious on if I have such a big data set, if I would be able to pull out any further information about this. So yeah, that's the lizards. But while I was doing this lizard research, I wasn't alone. For me, it's really important to give back to others. And so I became, in my first year of grad school, I became a graduate student mentor for the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program. This program no longer exists in this particular format, but they are still trying to, the people who ran this program outside of Doris Duke are still trying to figure out how they can keep the program going. And so it was a really cool program because it allowed undergraduate students to get 2 years of research experience. And so for the first year, they would come out with a graduate student mentor, like how I was. And then in the second year, they would go and then present research at the Ecological Society of America. And they also got to work with any nonprofit, federal, whoever agency that they wanted to do further research, as long as it was within the United States and it had a conservation focus. And so this was like such an important part of my journey, just being able to be this mentor. And it also inspired the chapter in my dissertation about barriers preventing Black women from entering and remaining in natural resources careers, because we did struggle to actually recruit people for this program, and it was paid, it was fully funded. And I wanted to know why. But having this kind of experience of being one of the main people to lead this program on our university campus really helped me in my career. And so I took all of this with me when I started working at the Los Angeles Zoo. And so in the middle top picture, you can see some of my interns from the first year that I did the program, and they are looking at their research poster. This is the first time for some of them have ever having done this kind of research. So the cool thing is that the zoo has this program called Paid Internship Program, PIP, and they take students who they have to have a Los Angeles home address, but but you don't have to go to college in Los Angeles. But they take these students, bring them onto the zoo grounds, and then there's a couple of areas of undeveloped land at the zoo. And so they get to do restoration projects there. So I would take the students, we would go through the learning about the scientific process. They let them self-select into their groups. I would let them pick their own projects within reason. Some of them wanted to do PhD level projects, and I'm like, we only have 10 weeks and you're not even here for a full 8 hours every day. That's not happening. But they really got to learn. And so like that's one of my favorite things is working with undergrads and to see them grow. And then in my role, so I am the coordinator of conservation engagement at the zoo. I also do other programs. We had a project where we would take people to a local park in LA called Griffith Park, and we would do restoration events there. And a lot of that is like pulling invasive mustard and tobacco plant and other invasives. But then I also got to do really cool stuff like we went to Los Angeles Comic-Con the last couple of years, and we did a couple of panels, and we actually boofed there this year. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of my outreach outside of the zoo, and then we're going to get back to the zoo in a second, but this is kind of what inspired the Comic-Con work. So one of the things that I've been able to do is become an If Then She Can ambassador. And so essentially this is a philanthropic organization that is about increasing the representation of women in STEM and supporting existing women in STEM to create resources for the next generation. And so one of my friends who is, I count myself as a nerd, but she is truly an ultra nerd. And so she got a group of us to start going to San Diego Comic-Con and do panels there and talk about how pop culture and STEM intertwine. And then also we do pop-up museums and various other activities. And so I was doing this before I got to the zoo. And so then I was just like, hey, I already know that people are super interested in this from this background. Let's, as the zoo, start to do this type of thing. So in the city of Los Angeles, the zoo or the city as a whole has a goal of tracking biodiversity and getting regular citizens or community members to do biodiversity tracking with the iNaturalist app. And so I was like, all right, well, let's do some bio blitzes and let's try to get people who normally wouldn't come to these kinds of events, because like a bio blitz is really cool, but it is so specific. And for a lot of people who are not like outdoorsy, people who are not in conservation or ecology, they'll see something like that and they'll kind of like blow it off and like, I only have so much time on a weekend. Why would I come and do this when I could come and do something that's like fun for me, that's, within my fandom, that is, building on an existing interest that I already have. And so I was like, well, I know from experience and doing all the San Diego Comic-Con stuff that people are interested. So let's just merge all these things together now. And so last year we did a panel and a Dungeons and Dragons themed bio blitz. And our panel was looking at the conservation implications of Animal Crossing New Horizons. This year, we also had a booth at LA Comic-Con, and we had almost 2,000 attendees stop at our booth. We did a panel on Delicious in Dungeon, which is a really great anime on Netflix. And we talked about how the creator put in all these like really great ecology and conservation topics into the show. Like it's not just about cooking, and it really has like this great science into it. So people are already consuming lots of science in their, regular media every day. And so how can we tap into that to show people like you essentially are a scientist, like you're seeing these things, you're learning about these things. You might as well now come outside and help us to take care of our environment because you already have all the information. And so the LA Comic-Con stuff was great because we ended up doubling the amount of people that we had to our bio blitz this year from last year, and a lot of them came from LA Comic-Con, whereas last year it was just random people at the park that we were at. and they were just like, oh, well, you're doing a thing. We're outside with the family, so we might as well stop by. Whereas this year we had people intentionally coming, which is a really big deal. And so our BioBlitz was at Bayona Wetlands, which is one of the last wetlands in Los Angeles. And it was really great to be able to do that. And then we partnered with a bunch of different other community organizations to get people there and to spread the word and to do other events around the city, just to let people know about the work that we were doing. And some people, not in this photo, but other people came actually dressed up in cosplay, which was really awesome. And so it just kind of shows that really meeting people where they are to do community engagement around conservation, it works. Like if you tap into people's fandoms, they will come, even if it's not exactly their fandom. If they, because it was it's so close to Halloween, we actually just did this on Sunday. People just came dressed up because of that too. So it's a new type of community engagement, but I do believe that it's really worth exploring. And then I also do around Find That Lizard. So this year I did this big thing for World Lizard Day, which included raising money for scholarships. My friend Allie Ward of the podcast Ologies got on essentially like a talkathon with me on Instagram Live to raise money for scholarships. And so we raised about, it says $2,500 there, but somebody did like a year-long subscription to send in money, so it's going to total out to about $2,800. So if you know any women, girls, gender non-conforming people, and most especially those who identify as Black or people of color who are interested in pursuing herpetology, the scholarship is for them. The way that we're actually going to do this is that we're going to do scholarships up to $1,000, but anybody can apply for any smaller amount as well. And then we will just give out money for as long as we have money. And so the scholarships can go towards anything from like conference travel or registration, like if you need something to pay tuition, or if you have a kid that wants to go to a summer camp around herpetology or conservation, something like that, then those are the things that we fund, because we want to pay it directly. Because if we just write somebody a check, then they'll get taxed on that, and we want the people to get the full amount possible. And so the application is on my website, and it's pretty easy. They just have to tell me why they're interested in herpetology, how they would use the money, and then that's pretty much it. And so the application closes on November 23rd, and I do need to spend the money by December 31st, because Sarah McAnulty, who runs Skype a Scientist, shout out to Sarah, is generously letting us use her Give Butter account. And so just to be a good partner, I need to spend that money. So if you know of anybody who would be interested and needs scholarships, please send them to my website. And then, yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to the rest of the conversation and any other questions. And if you're wanting to contact me, you can find me on socials at afro_herper. You can send me something on my website. I have a contact form at erynmcgee.com, or you can just send something to my email, afroherper@gmail.com.
Erin, that was great. I'm so inspired by the different kinds of outreach you're doing, and I have a 15-year-old daughter who is a huge anime fan, and I'm going to have to talk to her about this,
Absolutely.
and see if we can get her interested. I'm curious, you mentioned both in your dissertation research and then in real life that you've been working to understand what are some of the barriers to women of color, just in general, to entry into the natural resources field. You're in real life trying to explore all these different ways of connecting with people. And I'm just curious, what you've sort of learned, what are the takeaway messages about what are the barriers, and what maybe a related question is, what can organizations like ours do to help be allies and help folks in overcoming those barriers?
Yeah, so a lot of the barriers, and so what I noticed in my research is that there's different barriers. So you have cultural, so stuff like Black people don't go outside, um, structural, which are things like, redlining, racism, things like that.
Mhm.
And then you have financial barriers where, uh, you know, things where it's like, people, especially Black people and people of color in general, traditionally haven't gotten paid uh, or don't are not given the opportunity to have jobs that would allow for them to take off of work or to pay for, a annual pass to national parks and stuff like that. And all of those things intersect with each other. So if you think about like our history in this country, and I specifically as a Black person specifically studied things for Black people. So like if you think of, like slavery and Jim Crow and things like that. And so then it's like, a Black person could go in the woods and not come back. So like
Yeah.
the woods can be like a nefarious place and you don't want to go that. You teach your kids like, it's getting late, you never know who you can like run into and things like that. Like when I first started grad school, or actually really research, my family wasn't really worried about, the animals. They were worried about the people. They were like, "Do you want to, Arizona is an open carry state. If you want us to get you a gun," and I was like, "No, I'm gonna be okay, people. It's fine." Um, and so, like, I think that it's important to be able to just talk about those things honestly and openly, and it's just like, more matter of factly, too. Where it's like if we can acknowledge those things and really have conversations about them, then that's how we can partner with different groups to be able to be like, you know what, we do want to welcome you into this community because like you have been unwelcome explicitly, but never like fully welcomed in a way that meets you where you are, because obviously if you don't get the opportunity to recreate, you're not trying to go on a 10-mile hike, you're not trying to go backpacking and things like that. You might want to just take your little stereo and go walk a mile and come back, and that has to be enough. And so I think that just understanding that there are cultural barriers, and then, hiring people who represent these different cultures, represent these different groups to be able to, make that, liaison, essentially, that is the things that those are the steps to take.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and, even the language the story or the explanation you gave about the term noosing,
Mhm.
and changing the need to change that language is powerful because I think it's things you don't even realize if you're not somebody who is from a community that's gonna find that offensive. So, well, it seems to me like you've done a tremendous amount. Are you feeling positive about, or seeing change in terms of that kind of representation being effective and seeing shifts? Or are you still seeing pretty significant barriers? Like,
Uh,
are you feeling hopeful and is there progress? Or do we still just have a really long way to go?
Both.
Yeah,
Like, we still have a really long way to go, but there's definitely progress. Like, I never imagined, like, I'm connected with like so many other, Black and brown folks who are like, either outdoor enthusiasts or professionals. And when I was growing up, I was made to feel like it was just me.
yeah.
And so being able to build that community, and I think that for all of its ills, one thing that's really great about social media is that it is a really great connector, and I probably wouldn't have known all of these people without it. And so I think that that is something that is really great and powerful. So it's like we're out here and we're doing things, and slowly but surely together and with partners and allies and things like that, we really are making a difference. And so there is change happening for sure, but just because it's starting to happen doesn't mean it's time to stop. It means now it's
No,
time to
it's
put more
probably time
into
to
it
double
and keep
down.
going. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to make sure that we ask you a little bit about uh herps in the redwoods.
Yeah.
And I know this is not your area of where you've done most of your research, but um what do we need to know about herps in the redwoods? Are there herps in the redwoods? Are they imperiled? And are there things that organizations like Sempervirens should be doing to really pay attention to them?
Yeah, so there are a lot of species out there. You have your various, you got the Western fence lizard, you got the side blotch lizard, you got both species of alligator lizards, both like the northern and southern, which I think is really cool that you guys are in that overlapping
Yeah.
area. Then you have salamanders, newts, snakes, things like that. So you have like a bunch of like really cool species out there. And so I think that's something that is important to do, is just to be aware of them and to be aware of the people who are doing the research in the area. And then, further just the community engagement and just making it so that way when you're facing issues of like habitat loss and destruction and things like that, for whether it's for logging or creating new homes for people and stuff like that, is to make people feel connected with nature and with these animals in a way that they don't want to lose them. And I find that a lot of the times it's just like really like a couple of interactions, and it's half the time it's not even necessarily about the animals themselves. Like if you can really just take like have like 5 things that you go through that you can say to people to like really get them excited, the things that make you the most excited. Because like whenever people ask me about lizards, I have like my top 3 favorite lizard facts, and I pick whichever one depending on who I'm talking to, and I try to get a little information about them first to know which one to say to them. Or sometimes I might pick wrong and I have to go through all of them before I get to one that really gets this person excited. But because like people think about herps, or they don't. First of all, they don't really think about them, but when they do, they think about them as icky or slimy and gross and stuff like that. And so for me, I try to just instill wonder into people and share my enthusiasm and happiness with them and joy, so that way if they can feel a little bit of mine, then they can start to make their own.
Tell us your 3 top go-to lizard facts that we can use to inspire some wonder in this audience.
All right. So for the first one, this is my favorite one, but sometimes I get told it's boring, but I don't care. Um, is that not all lizards like lay eggs? Some give live birth. So the baby
Oh, I
hatched
didn't know
inside
that.
the mom, and then she pops out like actual like lizards that are ready to go run around. So I thought that was really cool.
Oh,
That's one of my
interesting.
favorites. And then you have the Gila monster, which is one of the few venomous lizards in the world, and we have it here in the US. And scientists took a compound out of their saliva to make a medicine for diabetes. And then
Oh,
for my like more technical people, there's this some whiptail lizard species that are asexual, and so they reproduce during not during through parthenogenesis, and so essentially they make clones of themselves. And what makes it even cooler is that these species tend to be hybrids, and so then it's like some of them are like singular crosses that make the of species A and species B cross to make species C, and then in that first cross, species C becomes asexual. And I just think that that's so cool. And then for most people, because they see Western fence lizards, so especially out here in the Western US, the Western fence lizard has a compound in their blood that neutralizes Lyme disease. And so that's one of the things that really gets people excited. They're like, oh, tell me more. And I'm like, all right, well, we could talk more about lizards now. So those are
oh, you
like
could
my
have
favorite
helped
ones to go through.
me with any one of those fun facts. Those are great.
Yeah.
All right, well, I see that we've got a ton of questions from the audience. So I'm gonna let Matt share a few of those. Otherwise, I will take up all your time asking questions I want to ask. So Matt, what do we have from the audience?
Thank you. I love those facts. And one of the questions was about Lyme disease. So thank you for
Hmm.
pre-answering that question.
Yeah.
We just got one in that I was actually curious about myself, so I'm going to ask it first. When doing your lizard measurements, have you noticed any trends? In particular, anything related to changes in climate? For example, smaller tails or other features that are changing?
So I haven't, and I haven't necessarily been looking for that either. So I'm sure somebody is looking at it. I just wasn't.
But there's not broad worry within the herp world about the impacts of climate change per se. I mean, I heard you referencing, uh, and maybe you were just talking about the Redwood region about the risks of development or from logging, but is there a broader concern about what climate change impacts are going to mean for various herps?
Absolutely. So, if you think, in California, we have a bunch of forest fires. Lizards cannot readily escape that.
Yeah.
So that's a type of thing. And, on the East Coast where they're having all the hurricanes, lizards can't escape that either. And then when you think about like the actual temperature, the feeling of getting hot itself, for a lot of lizards, they have a threshold for heat. And so, they can only move up the mountain for however high the mountain is. So as it gets hotter and hotter and hotter, they move up and up and up. And eventually, we lose species because it just becomes too hot for them if they can't adapt and evolve fast enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nat, did you have other questions?
I do. There's a question about the habit of lizards doing push-ups, and wondering if you could explain the purpose of that behavior.
Absolutely. So this is really fun because like the push-ups are essentially communication. So like think of a push-up as languages. And so each species has its own language. But then also the really cool part about that is that so like the language could be like say it does like a push, like a full push-up, then like a half push up, and then like go down all the way and do another half and then another full. That sequence is in its of itself the language, but then different populations, so the same species of lizard speaks the same language, but say you got one in Northern California and one in Southern California, the sequence of push-ups can be slightly different, so you can essentially call it a dialect of the same language. And I think that that is like so cool. But yeah, essentially the push-ups are mostly males, but females can be territorial too, but it's mostly males being territorial, being like, hey, you other male, don't come over here, this is my space, you don't want to fight with me. But ladies, I'm the biggest baddest male there is, and you want my genes, so come reproduce with me.
Wow. I can't believe that's what it's about.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that there are dialects across the same species geographically. That's astonishing.
It's really cool. Like lizards are so like people don't give lizards enough credit. Like people talk like lizard brain and stuff like that, and it's like, no, these lizards are kind of smart out here. Like they got a lot going on.
Well, I was astonished at your comment that they will remember if they've been caught once before and
Mhm.
be aware and not do the same thing again.
Yeah, it becomes infinitely harder to catch them after that first time.
Wow.
We have a lot of questions about tail loss, and I was
Mhm.
wondering if you could say a little bit about some of the reasons why lizards might already be missing portions of their tail, or if you're seeing more tail loss more frequently.
Yeah, so reasons why lizards drop their tail. So first of all, that whole thing is called caudal autonomy. And so if you think about the tail like a stack of Legos. So each individual Legos is a vertebrae, and so that's where the lizard can break off its tail. So say like my finger is a lizard's tail, I grab the lizard right here, then it can break its tail off at this point. If I grab it at the base, it can break the tail off at this point. But for the lizard where it only lost this piece, it can regrow that piece. And then at each vertebrae along the tail, it can drop its tail and regrow. But once it gets to the base and it loses all of its tail and it regrows that, it can never grow it again because it no longer has those vertebrae in there. It's just all one big cartilaginous piece of tissue. And so this is thought to be a response to predators, so that little piece of tail is moving and wiggling and distracts the predator so that the lizard can get away. And so when you see a lot of urban lizards missing their tails, it can be from anything from having like a natural predator, like a bird or a bigger lizard trying to grab onto it, or it like feral cats. And so cats are like really bad for our ecosystem. So if you have cats, keep them indoors, because otherwise they go after our native species, like lizards, and then try to capture them and eat them or just kill them. And so they could lose their tails from that. Lizards can be trying to get across roads and get the tail run over and then drop it that way. People can be trying to catch them by hand and then they drop their tail. And interestingly enough, I haven't actually read the study yet, but one of my colleagues just sent me a study about Western fence lizards, I believe, where if they drop their tails and have regrown tail, they also lose social status. So I'm really looking forward to reading that. But it kind of makes sense, like, oh, so you can't avoid predators, so or something like that. So your genes must not be that great, so don't want to reproduce with you. So it's really interesting. I can't wait to read that study to see what they actually say about that and what they hypothesize is like the reason for the loss of the social status.
What is the tail used for so that when it's gone, what changes?
Uh,
Like,
so
do they behave differently when they've lost their tail?
So it's used for like running and like actual like locomotion and keeping them balanced and stuff like that. Or if like
Mhm.
they fall off of something, it helps like them right themselves in the air, and things like that.
So loss of it, at least while it's growing back, does have some that makes them presumably more vulnerable.
Yeah, and it's also just like really energetically expensive.
Yeah,
Um,
right, to have to regrow that thing.
exactly.
Hmm, interesting.
Did want to ask a question about iNaturalist as a tool for identification. Is that something that you find reliable?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people who can give like research grade recommendations from iNaturalist, just because like there's like a lot of professionals or like people who are just like very much enthusiasts, and it tends to be pretty reliable, and people do go and check to make sure that the recommendations either from the algorithm or other people are correct.
Yeah, and for our audience, iNaturalist is an app that you can use to take a picture and get help identifying natural species.
We have lots more questions, but I did want to ask one before we go. What is your favorite lizard
Ooh, my
and
favorite
why?
lizard is Yarrow spiny lizard, Scopus yerevi, because that's the first lizard that I ever got to study, and it's what I credit to my life being the way that it is now, and helping me find a passion for ecology and conservation and community engagement and all that.
Well, you've certainly brought some passion to us. I've loved hearing your enthusiasm for this topic, both, and really it's multiple topics, both the reptiles and the herps broadly, as well as the questions about how to get broader representation and broader connection of this field, the natural resource field, to broader audiences. So thank you for speaking with us and sharing your insights. And really, thank you for the work you're doing to reach broader audiences. I'm amazed at the approaches that you're using. I think it's fantastic. So we really appreciate it and look forward to hearing more from you about what you do next.
Thanks so much
And
for having me.
yeah, and for our audience, thank you for joining us for this last webinar of the season of Under the Redwoods. We will look forward to having you rejoin us again in January with some new speakers yet to be announced. But if you're on this webinar or have been on any of our webinars this year, you'll get that information emailed out to you. So, and let's go look for some lizards. I really
Yeah.
am curious to see your Instagram. And just before we let you go, Erin, your very first picture had like some leaf litter and some tree branches. Did that have an actual lizard in it?
It did. Yeah.
It did. Boy, I couldn't find it. I was looking as you were talking. The second one that where you circled it, I could find it, but
Yeah.
that there you go. Just goes to show. I need to practice. Anyway, well, thank you again, and thank you to our audience for joining us, and we'll see you, the audience at least in January under the Redwoods.